A wealthy man mistreats and belittles his housemaid, but years later, she becomes his boss. What she says to him is truly unexpected. But before that, consider subscribing to the channel so we can keep sharing amazing stories. James Anderson was the kind of man who believed wealth gave him power over others. As the CEO of a thriving company, he was used to getting what he wanted without question. His mansion, a sprawling estate with meticulously manicured gardens and grand rooms, was a reflection of his success. Yet despite all his riches, James had a cold heart, one that saw people as tools rather than individuals. When Emily Carter, a quiet woman in her late 20s, arrived at the mansion for her first day as a housekeeper, James barely glanced at her. To him, she was just another employee, another cog in the machine of his life. Her job was simple: keep his house spotless, and nothing more. From the moment she stepped inside, James made it clear that he had no tolerance for mistakes. He spoke to her with a sharpness that cut through the air, his words laced with disdain. "Make sure you don't miss a spot," he snapped as she began her duties. "I don't pay you to slack off." James's eyes followed her every move, always searching for an error to criticize. If a single speck of dust remained, if a cushion was slightly out of place, he would pounce, using it as an excuse to belittle her. His arrogance knew no bounds, and he took a perverse pleasure in reminding Emily of her place beneath him. Emily, on her part, moved carefully through the mansion, aware of his gaze but saying nothing. Her silence was not from fear, but from necessity. James, however, mistook her quiet demeanor for weakness, reinforcing his belief that she was insignificant. The first day was only the beginning. James's relentless scrutiny and harsh words became a daily routine as he continued to treat Emily with the same contemptuous disregard. He never considered the impact of his actions, nor did he care. In his mind, Emily was there to serve and nothing more. Emily Carter was a woman of quiet strength. Life had not been easy for her. She had faced many challenges, but none as daunting as raising her daughter Lily on her own. Emily had always been humble, grounded by the reality of her circumstances, and her sole focus was to provide a better life for her child. This determination drove her to accept the job at James Anderson's mansion, despite knowing the reputation he had for being a difficult employer. Each morning, Emily would wake before dawn, preparing breakfast for Lily before taking her to the nearby daycare. The long hours of work were exhausting, but Emily never allowed herself to falter. She knew that the money she earned was vital to keeping a roof over their heads and food on the table. No matter how harshly James spoke to her, no matter how many times he tried to undermine her self-worth, Emily remained resolute. She would nod silently at his criticisms, suppressing the urge to defend herself, knowing that arguing would only put her job at risk. The loneliness of her role was palpable. The grand halls of the mansion echoed with her footsteps, and the silence often felt suffocating. Yet within that silence, Emily found solace. It was in these moments, as she scrubbed the floors or dusted the endless shelves, that she reminded herself why she endured such treatment. She would picture Lily's smiling face, remember the warmth of her daughter's hugs, and that was enough to keep her going. Emily's work ethic was impeccable. Every task she undertook, she completed with precision and care. She knew that, while James might never appreciate her efforts, she could take pride in the fact that she was doing her best. Even when James nitpicked over trivial matters, Emily did not allow his words to break her spirit. Instead, she used those moments to refine her skills, to push herself to be even better. Her hands may have been calloused from the hard work, but her resolve remained unshaken. Though Emily rarely showed her emotions, there were times when the weight of her situation pressed down on her heart. Late at night, after putting Lily to bed, she would sit quietly by the window, watching the stars and allowing herself a moment of vulnerability. She would think about the life she wanted to build for Lily, a life far removed from the one they were living now. Those thoughts were her anchor, giving her the strength to face another day of servitude in James Anderson's household. One afternoon, as Emily quietly cleaned the polished wooden surfaces of James's office, she felt the familiar tension that always accompanied being in his space. The room, with its imposing bookshelves and large mahogany desk, was a reflection of James's power and wealth. Emily worked diligently, her movements precise as she dusted every corner, ensuring that not a single speck of dirt remained. As she was bent over, carefully wiping the edges of a picture frame, she suddenly heard the door swing open behind her. The sound startled her, and she stood up quickly. turning to see James standing in the doorway. His expression was one of barely concealed disgust, his eyes narrowing as they swept over her. "What are you doing in here?" he snapped, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. Emily tried to explain that she was just finishing up the cleaning, but he cut her off with a wave of his hand. "People like you," he began, his tone dripping with condescension, "are meant for one thing, cleaning up after others. That's all you'll ever be good for. You're nothing more than a maid, destined to spend your life scrubbing floors and dusting furniture. Don't get any ideas above your station, Emily." The contempt in James's voice was palpable, each word laced with a deep-seated belief in his own superiority. To him, she was insignificant, a mere speck in the grand scheme of his life. But as the seconds passed, something shifted inside Emily. The sting of his words began to fade, replaced by a quiet resolve that she hadn't known she possessed. She didn't argue, didn't defend herself. There was no point in trying to change his mind. Instead, she met his gaze, her expression calm, and simply nodded. As she left the office, the door closing softly behind her, James's words continued to echo in her mind. But rather than letting them crush her spirit, Emily found herself growing stronger. His underestimation of her lit a fire deep within, a determination to prove that she was far more than what he saw. Though she remained outwardly composed, inside she was forging a silent promise to herself. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Emily's life began to take on a new rhythm. After finishing her long hours of work at James's mansion, she would return home, tuck Lily into bed, and then sit down at the small kitchen table with her old laptop. The quiet hum of the computer was the backdrop to her evenings, as she immersed herself in online courses about administration and business. The decision to study had not come easily. Emily knew that adding hours of learning to her already exhausting days would be a challenge. But every time she felt the weight of fatigue press down on her, she reminded herself of the future she wanted for Lily, a future where they were not bound by the limitations of their current circumstances. The image of her daughter's bright smile fueled her determination, pushing her to persevere even when the lessons became difficult and the nights seemed endless. Emily quickly discovered that she had a natural aptitude for business concepts. She absorbed information like a sponge, applying the same meticulous attention to detail in her studies that she did in her work. The numbers, strategies, and theories she learned became tools she could wield, each one a step closer to breaking free from the life she had been resigned to. At first, it was just about gaining knowledge, but soon Emily began to realize the potential within herself. She started dreaming bigger, seeing possibilities where before there had been none. She envisioned a life where she could provide for Lily in ways she had never imagined, a life where she was no longer at the mercy of someone like James. Meanwhile, James continued his life of opulence, utterly unaware of the transformation happening right under his nose. He remained ensconced in his luxurious bubble, concerned only with maintaining his status and enjoying the privileges his wealth afforded him. To James, the world was stable, predictable, and firmly under his control. The idea that anything could change, especially someone like Emily, never crossed his mind. But as Emily's nights of study continued, so too did her quiet metamorphosis. Each course completed, each new concept understood, was like laying another brick in the foundation of the life she was building. She was preparing herself, equipping herself with the tools she would need for the future she was determined to create, one where she and Lily would no longer be at the mercy of others. Years passed, and the world around James began to shift in ways he never anticipated. His company, once a symbol of his unchallenged success, started showing signs of strain. It began subtly, an unexpected dip in profits here, a failed project there, but James dismissed these as temporary setbacks. Confident in his abilities, he doubled down on risky investments, convinced that bold moves were the key to maintaining his empire. But as time went on, those small cracks widened into fissures. The economy took a turn for the worse, and the markets he had once dominated became increasingly volatile. James's decisions, which had once been celebrated as daring, now appeared reckless. His advisors warned him, suggesting more cautious approaches, but James, driven by pride and desperation, pushed forward, believing that a big win would restore everything. Instead, the losses mounted. Contracts were lost, key clients pulled out, and soon the company was hemorrhaging money. The empire James had spent decades building was crumbling beneath him, and the once unshakable foundation of his wealth began to erode. Each day brought new challenges, lawsuits, debts, and layoffs, eroding not just his business, but his confidence. The situation grew dire enough that James was forced to consider the unthinkable, selling the company. It was a bitter pill to swallow, one that shattered the image he had of himself as a master of his own destiny. The sale would mean admitting defeat, something he had never done in his life. But with no other options, and the threat of complete financial ruin looming, James reluctantly put the company on the market. In the weeks that followed, potential buyers came and went, but none seemed willing to take on a company in such disarray. Just as James began to lose hope, a mysterious investor group expressed interest. They moved quickly, their offer was generous, and the terms seemed too good to be true. Desperate and with no leverage left, James accepted, believing it was his only chance to salvage what little remained of his fortune. The paperwork was signed, the deal was done, and James found himself facing an uncertain future. He didn't know who the new owner was, nor did he care to ask. All that mattered to him was that the burden of his failing company was lifted. Little did he know that the person who now held the reins of his former empire was someone from his past, someone whose rise had been as quiet as his fall was loud. Emily's journey from a humble housekeeper to a successful businesswoman had been one of quiet determination and relentless effort. With each late-night study session and every exam passed, she inched closer to her goal. Her experience working multiple jobs, managing tight budgets, and learning the intricacies of business had paid off. Over time, she built a reputation for herself as a shrewd and capable entrepreneur, earning respect in the business community. With her newfound expertise, Emily began networking, meeting other entrepreneurs and investors who recognized her potential. Her story of rising from a challenging background to achieve success inspired many, and soon she found herself at the helm of her own small business. Emily's dedication and strategic thinking helped her business grow rapidly, and it wasn't long before she was approached by a group of investors interested in partnering with her. When the opportunity arose to purchase a struggling company, Emily recognized it immediately as the very same business that had once been owned by James Anderson. The irony was not lost on her, but Emily was not motivated by revenge. She saw this as a chance to expand her own ventures and turn around a failing company, using the skills she had honed over the years. After careful negotiations, Emily, along with her group of investors, successfully acquired the company. The transition was swift, and the first order of business was to introduce the new leadership to the remaining staff and executives. Emily knew that this moment would be significant, not just for the company, but for her personally. It marked the culmination of years of hard work and resilience. On the day of the introduction, the atmosphere in the boardroom was tense. The employees, uncertain about their future under the new management, sat quietly, waiting for the new CEO to arrive. When Emily entered the room, dressed in a tailored suit that reflected her professional stature, she exuded confidence. Her presence commanded attention, and as she walked to the head of the table, there was a moment of stunned silence. The woman who had once been dismissed as nothing more than a maid now stood before them as their leader. Emily greeted the room with a calm, measured tone, her voice steady as she addressed the staff. She spoke about her vision for the company, emphasizing the importance of collaboration, innovation, and mutual respect. As she spoke, she noticed James sitting at the far end of the table, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. Emily maintained her composure, fully aware of the magnitude of this moment, but choosing to remain focused on the task at hand. James sat frozen in his seat, his mind struggling to process the reality before him. The woman he had once dismissed so easily, who had cleaned his floors and quietly endured his cruelty, was now the CEO of his former company. His thoughts raced as he tried to reconcile the image of Emily as a humble maid with the poised, powerful figure now seated at the head of the table. It felt as though the world had flipped upside down in an instant, and for the first time in his life, James found himself at a complete loss. He could barely focus on the words Emily was saying as she outlined her vision for the company. All he could see was the stark contrast between where they each now stood. James, who had always prided himself on his dominance and control, was now reduced to an employee in a company he no longer owned, and Emily, the woman he had believed would never rise above her station, had achieved a position of authority he never could have imagined for her. As he watched her speak, James could feel the weight of his past actions pressing down on him. The arrogance, the harsh words, the dismissive attitude, everything came rushing back, now viewed through a lens of bitter irony. Emily's calm demeanor only heightened his sense of unease. There was no trace of resentment in her voice, no hint of the indignation he would have expected. Instead, she spoke with a quiet confidence that left no doubt about who was in charge. Emily, on the other hand, remained composed, fully aware of the impact her presence was having on James. She had anticipated this moment, understanding the significance it held not just for him, but for herself as well. This was her opportunity to demonstrate, not just to James, but to everyone in the room, that underestimating someone based on their circumstances was a grave mistake. She had worked tirelessly to reach this point, and now, sitting in the very chair that once symbolized James's power, she felt a sense of vindication, not through revenge, but through the knowledge that she had proven her worth in a way that was undeniable. As she continued her address, Emily made it clear that this was a new era for the company, one where respect and integrity would be the cornerstones of their operations. She didn't need to look directly at James to make her point. The mere fact of her leadership spoke volumes. The room was hers, the company was hers, and the future was hers to shape. James could do nothing but sit and watch as the reality of his new position set in, under the leadership of the very person he had once deemed insignificant. As the meeting drew to a close and the room began to empty, James lingered behind, the weight of everything that had transpired pressing down on him. He watched as Emily gathered her notes, her focus unwavering. Unable to remain silent any longer, he approached her, his voice strained as he attempted to justify himself. "Emily," he began, the confidence that had once defined him now replaced by an edge of desperation. "I was always hard on everyone because I believed it was necessary for the success of the company. I never meant anything personal by it. I had to be demanding, for the good of the business." She had lived through the humiliation, the harshness that had gone far beyond what was necessary or justifiable. There was a time when those words might have shaken her, but now they were nothing more than hollow echoes of a past she had long since overcome. "I remember very well," she said, her voice measured and clear, "how you told me that people like me would never be anything more than a maid. You said I was destined to clean floors and serve others for the rest of my life." Now those same words were being used to confront him with the reality of his own arrogance. Emily continued, her expression softening slightly, but her tone firm. "I don't hold any grudge against you, James. Life has a way of teaching us lessons, and mine has taught me the value of perseverance and self-worth. My life isn't a story of bitterness. It's a story of overcoming obstacles, of proving to myself and to the world that I am more than what others might think of me." There was a sense of finality in what she said, not of vengeance, but of closure. Emily had moved beyond the limitations that others, including James, had tried to place on her. She had risen above them, not through hatred, but through her own strength and determination. And now, standing in front of the man who once doubted her, she felt nothing but the peace that comes from knowing one's true worth. James, on the other hand, was left with the uncomfortable truth that his past actions had consequences, ones he could not easily dismiss or rationalize away. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably, and all he could do was acknowledge the remarkable woman Emily had become. Emily considered her options carefully. She could have easily dismissed James from the company entirely, ending his association with the business he once commanded. But as she looked at him, standing there visibly humbled, she saw an opportunity for something different, something that could offer both of them a new beginning, albeit under drastically altered circumstances. She knew that firing James might have been the expected move, but it wouldn't offer the closure or growth she desired. Instead, she decided to give him a chance, though not without setting clear terms that would ensure he understood the new dynamics. "James," she began, her tone authoritative but not unkind, "I'm willing to give you an opportunity to stay with the company, but under one condition. You will work as a manager in one of the departments, reporting directly to me. This isn't a gesture of charity, but a chance for you to rebuild, to contribute in a meaningful way under my guidance." The position she was offering was far from the executive role he once held. It was a demotion, by every measure. But James knew he was in no position to negotiate. His reputation had already taken a severe hit, and the prospect of starting over elsewhere, especially with his tarnished name, was daunting. Swallowing his pride was the hardest part. James had spent his entire career at the top, dictating orders and making decisions without ever having to answer to anyone. Now, the tables had turned, and the very woman he had once belittled was offering him a path forward, albeit on her terms. He nodded slowly, the weight of the decision evident on his face. "I accept," he said, his voice lacking the confidence it once held. The reality of working under Emily was difficult to process, but he knew it was the only viable option he had left. Emily didn't gloat or show any sign of satisfaction. She simply nodded in return, acknowledging his acceptance with the professionalism she had always maintained. This was her decision, and she was determined to ensure that it would be a constructive one for both of them. The implications were clear. James would have to adjust to his new role, learning to navigate a position that required him to be accountable to the very person he had once dismissed. It was a chance for him to rebuild, but it would require humility, discipline, and the willingness to adapt to a reality where he was no longer in control. As James settled into his new role as a manager, the reality of his changed circumstances became more apparent with each passing day. The initial shock of reporting to Emily, the woman he once belittled, had been profound. But as time went on, something unexpected began to happen. James started to see Emily in a new light, not as the maid he had once dismissed, but as a remarkable leader and, more importantly, as a person of deep integrity and strength. Working closely with her, James couldn't help but notice how Emily handled every challenge with grace and precision. She made decisions that balanced the needs of the company with the well-being of its employees, a far cry from the cutthroat, profit-driven mentality he had once upheld. Emily's leadership was marked by empathy and foresight, qualities James realized he had sorely lacked during his time at the helm. The more he observed her, the more he admired her. Emily's journey from housekeeper to CEO was nothing short of extraordinary, and it was clear that her success was not merely a result of hard work, but also of a deep, unshakable belief in herself and her ability to overcome adversity. James found himself reflecting on his own life, on the choices he had made, and on the person he had become. The arrogance that had once defined him now seemed hollow, an armor he no longer needed or wanted to wear. James began to change. He approached his work with a newfound humility, no longer driven by ego, but by a genuine desire to contribute meaningfully to the company. He started to take pride in his role, no matter how diminished it was from what he once held. He listened more, learned from those around him, and most importantly, he began to value the relationships he was building, rather than merely viewing them as transactional. This transformation didn't happen overnight, but gradually, as James allowed himself to be influenced by Emily's example. Her strength, resilience, and kindness were qualities he had never truly appreciated before, and now they were teaching him how to be a better person. The respect he developed for her was profound, and with it came a sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the opportunity to change, to grow, and to redefine who he was. James's arrogance, once so deeply ingrained, started to fade, replaced by a humility that allowed him to see the world differently. He no longer viewed himself as superior to those around him. Instead, he saw himself as part of a team, each member contributing to a shared goal. This shift in perspective was liberating, freeing him from the chains of his own ego and opening his eyes to the value of humility and gratitude. As time went on, Emily and James found themselves working together more frequently. What had started as an awkward and tense arrangement gradually began to shift. Emily had initially kept her distance, maintaining a professional demeanor that left little room for personal connection. She had no intention of letting James too close, aware that their history was fraught with tension and unspoken resentments. But as they collaborated on various projects, something unexpected happened. James, now stripped of the arrogance that had once defined him, approached his work with a humility that Emily couldn't help but notice. He no longer carried the air of superiority she had known. Instead, he seemed genuinely invested in the success of the company and in supporting her vision for its future. Emily, in turn, began to soften. She had been prepared to lead with a firm hand, ensuring that James understood his place in this new dynamic. But as she observed his transformation, her own resolve shifted. The anger and resentment she had once held started to dissipate, replaced by a cautious respect. She could see that James was trying, really trying to make amends, not just through words, but through his actions. Their conversations, once curt and formal, began to open up. They discussed business strategies, shared ideas, and even debated over the best ways to tackle challenges. Emily found herself appreciating James's experience and insights, while James grew to admire Emily's fresh perspective and innovative thinking. It was a balance that neither had anticipated, but one that began to work surprisingly well. What had started as a silent act of vindication for Emily slowly transformed into something more meaningful. The more they worked together, the more she realized that this wasn't just about proving a point. She had already shown that she could rise above their shared past. But now, she saw an opportunity to build something new, something better. And for James, this partnership became a path to redemption, a chance to rebuild not just his professional life, but his personal integrity as well. Their relationship evolved into one of mutual respect, each recognizing the strengths and value the other brought to the table. It was a dynamic that neither could have predicted, given their history, but it became an essential part of the company's new direction. The tension of the past gave way to a sense of collaboration as they both worked towards a common goal, their shared experiences quietly reshaping their perspectives on life, leadership, and each other. In the end, Emily's leadership of the company became a testament to the values she had held on to throughout her life. She understood that true power wasn't about dominance or control. It was about resilience, compassion, and the ability to lift others as you rose. Her success wasn't merely a result of her hard work, but of her unwavering commitment to maintaining her humanity in the face of adversity. Emily's approach to leadership was grounded in the lessons she had learned from her own experiences. She fostered an environment where every employee felt valued, where their contributions were recognized and appreciated. She believed in the potential of her team and invested in their growth, understanding that a thriving company was built on the collective strength of its people. This philosophy resonated throughout the organization, creating a culture of collaboration and mutual respect that was a stark contrast to the toxic environment James had once cultivated. James, for his part, had undergone a profound transformation. Working alongside Emily had reshaped his understanding of success. He no longer measured it by the size of his bank account or the reach of his influence, but by the positive impact he could have on others. Emily had shown him that wealth and power were fleeting, but the ability to turn hardship into opportunity was invaluable. He became not just an ally to Emily, but an advocate for the values she championed. Their relationship, once fraught with tension and power struggles, evolved into a partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals. James supported Emily in every decision, providing his insights when needed, but always deferring to her judgment. He had learned to appreciate her wisdom and the unique perspective she brought to the table, recognizing that her leadership was exactly what the company needed to thrive. Emily's influence extended beyond the walls of the company. She became a role model for others in the business community, particularly women who looked up to her as proof that they could overcome any barrier placed before them. Her story was one of triumph, not just in the business sense, but in a much deeper, more personal way. She had taken the challenges life had thrown at her and turned them into stepping stones, rising above them with grace and determination. With a heart full of gratitude, Emily continued to lead the company with the same wisdom and integrity that had guided her throughout her journey. She knew that her success was not just about what she had achieved, but about how she had achieved it, by staying true to herself and her values. And as she looked to the future, she did so with confidence, knowing that she had built something lasting and meaningful, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been a part of her story.